Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It all started with a letter tucked under the gate, scented with lavender and arrogance. They didn't want me to trim a hedge or paint a fence. No, they wanted me to move my house 10 feet back. That's when I knew. This wasn't a request. It was the opening shot. I always thought that if trouble ever came knocking, it'd be in the form of a busted water heater or a bear digging through the trash, not a letter in a plastic HOA envelope. But there it was. Thick white cardstock. Cedar Crest Hills logo printed like it was some damn seal of the president, slipped under my gate one morning. I opened it while sipping my coffee on the porch just after sunrise. The paper smelled like lavender and arrogance. They wanted me to move my house, not just tweak a fence or trim some bushes, move the actual house 10 feet back, because apparently it was visually disrupting the architectural axis of the entrance corridor. Their words. My first reaction was laughter, followed immediately by that dry, slow-building dread you get when you realize someone's serious about something stupid. My name's Ray Malone. I'm 44, father of 2, and I inherited this house, a single-story stone rancher with cedar siding and a wraparound porch, from my grandfather, built in the 70s, on land he bought cheap when no one wanted to live in the damn foothills. 5 acres of freedom. He laid the foundation himself. I grew up here, moved away for architecture school. Then the world spun a few times too fast. My wife passed away, the city wore me down, and I came back. I didn't join any damn HOA. Cedar Crest Hills, though. They sprouted up like dandelions a few years ago. Some real estate wet dream. Identical stucco mansions with fake balconies and matching mailboxes. They surrounded my property like a smug little fortress. I never signed anything, never sold a foot of land. I wasn't theirs. I made damn sure of that when I moved back. Even had the title company highlight the exemption line in neon pink. Still, this letter was real. Request for realignment of residential structure. I rubbed my temples. The reasoning? To maintain aesthetic harmony along the shared corridor of approach. In other words, they didn't like seeing my house when they drove in through their glossy gates. They'd even attached a glossy aerial photo with my house circled in red like a crime scene, as if my porch swing was public indecency. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake, a mix-up. Surely someone saw the old zoning lines and thought I was part of their tidy little fiefdom, so I did what any rational man would do. I walked the half-mile down the road, crossed their little brick threshold, and entered their HOA office. It was a converted model home, complete with fake fruit on the kitchen island and a water feature humming like it was paid by the hour. Inside I met her, Karen Murray, president of the Cedar Crest Hills HOA. I knew it was her before she spoke. Perfect beige suit, hair sprayed into lacquered submission, lips pressed so tight they looked like a paper cut. "You must be Mr. Malone," she said, standing up like she'd been rehearsing it in a mirror all morning. "Guilty," I replied. "Got your letter. Figured I'd clear up the confusion in person." "There's no confusion," she said, like she'd been waiting her whole life to say it. "Your house violates the visual standards of the main entrance corridor. We require that all properties adhere to a setback alignment consistent with community standards." I blinked. This house was here before your community existed. She smiled like a teacher humoring a dumb student. "That may be, but times change. You may not be formally listed within our association, but you are adjacent to it. And visual cohesion is a concern shared by all residents. Your property affects property values." "I'm not one of your residents," I said flatly. "You're close enough," she said. I laughed, couldn't help it. "Lady, this house has stood in that spot for 50 damn years. You don't get to tell me to jack it up and drag it 10 feet because it hurts your feelings." Karen's face didn't even twitch. "You'd be surprised what we can do, Mr. Malone. Cooperation is much easier than confrontation." I'd strongly advise the former. I left before I said something I'd regret. As I stepped out, I caught a glimpse of her office wall. Photos of ribbon cuttings, smiling board members, even a framed HOA award from some local development council. She didn't run a neighborhood. She ran a regime. I walked home slower than usual, trying to decide whether I was angrier at the absurdity of it or the fact that someone thought they had power over me just because their fence touched mine. The old stone porch looked as sturdy as ever when I got back. Granddad built it with hand-mixed mortar, said if anything outlasted him, it'd be that house. Karen Murray could get in line behind time and weather if she thought she could move it. 2 days after my polite little visit to the Stepford Citadel known as Cedar Crest Hills, I woke up to find strangers poking metal rods into my lawn. It was early, maybe 6:45, and the light outside had that hazy orange hue Colorado mornings get in late spring. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching two men in high-vis vests walking across my field with what looked like surveyor's equipment. They were marking spots with bright pink flags, walking in grid lines, measuring something. I stepped out onto the porch. "You boys need something." One of them looked up. The younger guy, maybe early 30s with a clipboard and a nervous twitch. The other was older, thicker around the waist, and way too confident. "We're just doing a routine boundary assessment," the older one said, barely glancing at me. "On whose authority?" "Community Development Department." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't get a notice." "And this land's not under any development jurisdiction." Now the twitchy one spoke up. We were just told to survey this parcel and determine the structure offset from the road." I took a step off the porch. "You were told by who exactly?" Neither of them answered. I walked right up and said calmly but firmly, "Get off my property. Now, this isn't public land. You're trespassing. I'll give you 2 minutes before I call the sheriff." They packed up faster than a rattlesnake backs away from a boot. Later that day, a plain white SUV parked on the edge of my driveway. A man stepped out wearing khakis and a badge clipped to his belt, except the badge was suspiciously generic. No city logo, no agency name, just Building Inspection Division typed onto a plastic card like it was printed at a Staples. He walked up, clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm here to review your foundation compliance documents." "Excuse me?" "Your foundation," he said, flipping through a blank form like it meant something. "I need to confirm compliance with updated regional setback standards." I stared at him. "Who sent you?" He hesitated. "The local housing authority." "Name it." He paused again. "The Cedar Crest Hills Community Oversight Board." I laughed in his face. "That's not a government agency. That's a bunch of retirees with power complexes and walkie-talkies. You got 30 seconds to get off my land, or I call the actual authorities." He mumbled something about just doing his job and left. I started keeping a camera on my dash and another near the front porch. Didn't feel paranoid, felt necessary. Then came the spray paint. 3 days later, I stepped out in the morning and saw neon orange lines scrawled across the gravel drive and out toward the base of the house. Arrows, numbers, cryptic notes like setback X and remove barrier, like some twisted game of HOA hopscotch. I stared at it, heat rising in my neck. My kids, Maya and Eli, were inside finishing breakfast, completely unaware that some HOA goon squad had crept onto their granddad's land under cover of darkness. My land, my house. I took pictures, sent them to the county recorder's office, and left a message with the sheriff. That same evening, I got a call from an old contractor buddy of mine, Doug, who'd helped me with a few design projects around town. He sounded uncomfortable. "Ray, listen, I got a call today. Some lady from Cedar Crest Hills left a message on the business line. Said she was concerned that we were doing unauthorized work near their jurisdiction." "They called your office?" "Yeah. Said they strongly discourage local professionals from working on non-compliant properties, whatever the hell that means." "They're blacklisting me," I said quietly. Doug sighed. "I don't need this headache, man. I got 3 kids in private school. You know I respect you, but—" "Yeah," I said. "I get it." Click. It didn't stop there. Over the next week, I noticed the subtle shift. My Amazon packages were dumped at the edge of the drive instead of by the porch. The garbage truck forgot my pickup. Local teenagers who used to mow lawns started avoiding eye contact. A neighbor down the road, Sam, waved at me one morning and then immediately glanced around like he'd done something wrong. They were isolating me. Soft pressure, whisper campaigns. Then I got another letter. This one certified. HOA letterhead. Legalese thicker than molasses, citing local zoning statutes and community visual harmony standards. It claimed that my house violated Article 7, Section 5 of the county's alignment code. Something about frontage line. Congruence. I flipped through it 3 times. It was pure fiction, or at best, a loose interpretation of a regulation meant for actual HOA members. They even filed a civil zoning complaint in the local court. The notice was stapled to my gate. That night, I sat on my porch and cracked a beer. The house creaked in the wind like it was chuckling with me. "You see this, old man," I muttered, looking at the sky. "They want to move you." The house didn't answer, but it didn't have to. Neither of us were going anywhere. The day after I found the zoning complaint pinned to my gate like a goddamn eviction notice, I decided I'd had enough of playing defense. I needed to stop reacting and start unearthing whatever the hell game Karen and her HOA army were playing. That's when I called Jeffrey Conrad, retired county cadastral specialist, one-time riverboat gambler in Reno, and my best friend since 3rd grade. The guy once mapped flood zones for half the state with a hangover and a broken wrist. If there was one person who could navigate the legal and bureaucratic hellscape of property lines and zoning loopholes, it was him. He showed up that afternoon in his beat-up Ford Ranger, the passenger seat filled with rolled blueprints, protein bars, and a milk crate labeled "Gov Lies, probably." "Still got that whiskey from your divorce?" he asked before saying hello. "Still unopened," I said, shaking his hand. "Let's earn it." We set up shop in my workshop where I kept all the old documents my grandfather had stored away, permits, plat maps, even a 1974 county zoning pamphlet with a photo of the original surveyor smiling like he just cheated on his taxes. Jeff dove in like a bloodhound. We cross-referenced GIS maps, county assessor records, land deeds, topographical overlays. Hell, at one point he brought up a weathered manila folder with "not a damn HOA" scribbled across it in marker. It was one of his old personal archives documenting properties that were deliberately zoned outside any homeowner association jurisdiction. And guess what was inside? A copy of the 1983 court ruling where Cedar Crest Hills, well, back then it was called Silver Birch Holdings, tried and failed to annex my grandfather's lot. The judge at the time ruled that our land was a historically separate residential zone with no shared governance structures. There it was, in ink. A 42-year-old legal middle finger to Karen Murray's little empire. But that wasn't even the juiciest part. Digging deeper, Jeff found an archived note in the assessor's files from 1992, where a planning commission member explicitly stated Malone Lot to remain exempt from all association incorporations due to standing family land trust. Agreement. In other words, my land was firewalled against HOA control before most of Cedar Crest's current residents were out of diapers. Jeff leaned back, smiling like a cat who just saw the can opener. "She's bluffing," he said. "But she's not just bluffing. You're being set up." "What do you mean?" He pointed to the zoning complaint. This document references a setback code from Section 5B of the Regional Municipal Overlay, but that overlay doesn't even apply outside of incorporated HOA lots. They're trying to create the illusion of legal authority. It's pressure theater. "Pressure theater," I repeated. "That would be a great band name." He grinned. "Only if it's punk rock." We got to work building a counter case. I called my attorney, Nancy Levins, sharp as barbed wire and just as gentle, and we drafted a response demanding immediate withdrawal of the complaint under grounds of jurisdictional overreach and property harassment. We also added a cease and desist just to spice it up. Then I filed my own suit. Civil, not criminal, yet. Cause of action: HOA interference in exempt land management, fraudulent misrepresentation of zoning authority, attempted intimidation, and unauthorized trespass by unlicensed personnel. Nancy sent it via certified mail with a thick packet of supporting evidence, including drone footage of the fake inspector, photographs of the spray-painted demolition lines, and Jeff's annotated maps. And just to be petty, I included a notarized copy of the 1983 court decision in a custom folder that said "Not your damn business" on the cover. 2 days later, we received a response, or rather, a reaction. One of the surveyors came forward anonymously through his union rep. Turned out he wasn't licensed. Never had been. Karen had hired him off Craigslist under the pretense of private property documentation for a community project. He was paid in cash. No contract, no paper trail. Then Nancy dug into the faux inspector. His name? Todd Elkins. And wouldn't you know it, he was the cousin of Karen's husband, had no official license, and his badge was made with a printer and a laminator bought off Amazon. We submitted all of it to the court as an evidentiary addendum. Things were shifting. Fast. In the background, Karen kept quiet. No more letters. No more visitors. But I could feel it, like the sudden calm before a tornado touches down. One night, I was walking the perimeter of my property with a flashlight, checking the gate locks and motion sensors, when I saw it, Down near the edge of the southern field, a shadow moved and then ducked. I shined the light, but it was gone, just enough to keep me on edge. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of that divorce whiskey, and sat at the kitchen table with Jeff. "They know," I said. Jeff nodded. "But now you do too." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which seemed fitting somehow. Tuesday is the weekday nobody respects. The gray smear between Monday's dread and Wednesday's false hope seemed like the right setting for a legal showdown with people who took shrub height and mailbox fonts way too seriously. I arrived at the county courthouse in a borrowed suit, still had the tag from the rental place flapping against my neck, and carrying a leather binder full of evidence thicker than Karen's foundation. Nancy, my attorney, met me on the courthouse steps, dressed in her usual courtroom uniform, black blazer, glasses that could slice glass, and an attitude that made federal prosecutors blink first. "You ready to piss on the empire?" she asked. "I've been marinating for weeks," I replied. Inside, we faced off in courtroom 3. The other side had brought reinforcements, Karen Murray herself, flanked by 3 attorneys in matching navy suits. They looked like they'd been cut from the same arrogant bolt of cloth. One of them, let's call him Mr. Eyebrows, kept tapping his Mont Blanc pen like it was a metronome of smugness. The judge was a no-nonsense type named Eleanor Parrish, early 60s, silver bob, and the posture of someone who once threw a state senator out of her court. I liked her immediately. The HOA's counsel went first. They presented a heavily rehearsed slideshow about architectural cohesion and community gateway optics. At one point, they referred to my house as an aesthetic intruder. I almost laughed out loud. They claimed my property, while technically outside the HOA's official plat, fell under visual influence jurisdiction, a phrase so ridiculous Nancy wrote it down and underlined it 3 times just for fun. They cited zoning codes, misquoted overlays, even produced a blurry sitemap with my home marked in red, accompanied by dramatic statistics like 23% deviation from frontage standard and 82% visual incongruence. I started wondering if they'd hired a graphics intern from Fox News. Then it was our turn. Nancy didn't bother with theatrics. She stood, straightened her papers, and began. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs are attempting to exert control over property they have no legal authority to regulate through a combination of intimidation, misrepresentation, and in some cases, outright fraud." She submitted our evidence, Jeff's documentation, the 1983 court ruling, the zoning exemptions, the anonymous contractor testimony, and the videos of the so-called inspector. Judge Parrish raised an eyebrow. "Is it true this inspector was the defendant's husband's cousin?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nancy said without missing a beat. "He was not licensed, not certified, and used a counterfeit badge to enter my client's land." Murmurs filled the room. Karen's expression didn't twitch, but her lawyer leaned toward her with a sudden nervous intensity. Nancy continued. "Furthermore, the HOA's filing CD's Article 7, Section 5, a code that only applies to internal zoning within registered HOAs. My client's property is legally exempt, a fact they are either ignoring or choosing to obfuscate for strategic gain." The judge flipped through the documents. The silence in that room was deep, tense. Finally, Judge Parrish closed the folder with a soft thud and looked at Karen's team. "Do you have any documents proving your jurisdiction over the defendant's land?" Mr. Eyebrows stood up. "Well, we believe—" "I didn't ask what you believe, counselor. I asked what you have." He glanced at his papers, then slowly sat back down. Judge Parrish turned to me. "Mr. Malone, I'm issuing a temporary injunction barring any representatives of the Cedar Crest Hills HOA from entering your property or contacting you directly until this matter is resolved." I nodded, almost too stunned to speak. She looked at Karen. "And I strongly recommend your association cease any further attempts to apply governance outside your jurisdiction, or we will escalate this to a formal misconduct review." Karen didn't blink, but her jaw tightened just enough to register defeat. The hearing ended there. No one clapped, it wasn't a movie, but Nancy smiled, and I could feel the mood shift. 1 round down, blood on the floor. And this time, it wasn't mine. That night, as I was locking up the front gate, I noticed something spray-painted on the gravel driveway again. But it wasn't a code. It was a warning. "You think this is over?" I stood there in the beam of my porch light, looking at those words. My fingers tightened around the key in my hand. I didn't say it out loud, but the answer was simple. Number it wasn't over, not even close. I woke to the sound of metal grinding against stone. It was 2:47 in the morning. Pitch black outside, save for the faint yellow flicker of my floodlights. At first I thought maybe a deer had triggered the motion sensor, or maybe one of the neighbor's kids was screwing around near the fence again. I wasn't prepared for what I actually saw when I looked out my bedroom window. A goddamn backhoe was rolling across my field, not down the road, not parked outside, but on my land, crawling up the slope toward my house like it belonged there. The engine was idling low, the headlights off, but the thing was definitely running. Behind it were two pickup trucks, and from the cab of one stepped out a man in a yellow vest waving his arm toward the porch. My porch. I didn't think. I just grabbed my boots, my coat, and the camera I'd kept by the front door ever since this circus started. My hands were shaking as I turned it on. I stepped outside into the cold mountain air, the kind that bites your lungs and tells you something's gone terribly, deeply wrong. The backhoe operator cut the engine as I approached. "You can't be out here, sir." "This area's under mandated development review." I aimed the flashlight square at his face. "Mandated by who?" "HOA admin, Cedar Crest Hills." I laughed. It wasn't even anger at this point. It was so absurd. I had to laugh. "Do you people ever read a damn boundary line?" He turned away, mumbled something into his walkie. One of the other men, balding, nervous, clearly not the muscle of the operation, approached me with a clipboard. "You're Mr. Malone, correct?" "Who the hell are you?" "Michael Denton, site lead. We've been contracted to begin repositioning of a non-compliant structure based on local homeowner mandate filed under—" "Stop talking." I clicked on the camera. "Say all of that again, but slower and directly into the lens." He froze. I walked backward toward the house, still filming. "You've entered private property at 2 in the morning with heavy equipment and no permits, no officers, and no legal order. I've already called the sheriff, and you've got exactly one shot at walking off this land without cuffs on your wrists." That part was a bluff. I hadn't called the cops yet. I'd been too stunned. But I fixed that quickly, dialed with one hand while keeping the camera rolling with the other. 911, what is your emergency?" "Yes, ma'am. I've got unauthorized personnel with heavy machinery attempting to carry out demolition on private property. This is not a joke. I need sheriff deputies dispatched immediately." By the time the first patrol car arrived, 15 minutes later, 2 of the workers had already started backing out. The others stayed, trying to act like they were the victims. One of them claimed they were told the owner had agreed to begin early adjustments to avoid court fees. Bullshit. And I had the footage to prove it. Deputy Collins, the same guy who'd helped me once when my septic tank overflowed 5 years ago, stepped out of his cruiser, flashlight already raised. "Ray, what the hell's going on?" "You tell me," I said, gesturing to the illegal bulldozer brigade. "They claim they were hired by the HOA to start moving my house." Deputy Collins turned to the site lead. "You got a permit?" "Work order." "No, sir," the man stammered. "We were just told—" "You on contract?" He didn't answer. Within an hour, 3 more units had arrived. Statements were taken, IDs checked, equipment impounded, cameras scanned for serial numbers. By dawn, the backhoe was being towed off my land, and half of Karen Murray's neighborhood knew what had happened. I stood out on the porch with a cup of coffee, fresh brewed, black, burning hot, and watched as the site crew got cuffed, cited for trespassing, and escorted off one by one. Deputy Collins handed me a clipboard. "You'll need to give an official statement, probably later today. DA might open criminal charges depending on what we find in their phones and records." "Good," I said. "And Ray," he added, lowering his voice. "We found an invoice stub in the truck cab. The account used to book the machine. It's linked to the HOA's operations fund." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope. Even had Karen M. listed under admin approval. We're going to get a warrant for the full ledger." And just like that, it wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was organized property interference, with HOA funds backing a felony-grade break-in. That afternoon, I filed a new criminal complaint, unlawful entry with intent to dismantle, malicious destruction of property, and unauthorized site work on zoned land. I also added a formal complaint to the State Licensing Board for Real Estate and Construction Oversight, citing the HOA's Architectural Committee for falsified documents and inciting unlicensed activity. Then I called Jeff and told him to install a second row of motion sensors and at least 2 more private property, trespassers will be prosecuted signs at every entry point, including the creek bed behind the hill. I was done playing polite. By sunset, I had security lights rigged up along the eastern field, an extra lock on the workshop, and cameras uploading footage straight to cloud backup every 5 minutes. Let them come again. I wouldn't just fight this time. I'd bury them in the truth. It didn't take long for the story to blow up. By the next morning, the local news van was idling just outside my gate, the reporter pacing in a windbreaker like he couldn't believe his luck. I wasn't planning to go public. Hell, I wasn't looking for attention. But when your land gets stormed in the middle of the night by an HOA-backed death machine, you start thinking maybe the world ought to know what kind of lunatics are running the neighborhood. I gave them the footage, all of it. The spray paint, the fake inspector, the Craigslist survey crew, and the moonlit bulldozer rolling across my field like we were filming the Colorado remake of Apocalypse Now. Within 48 hours, headlines were popping up online. HOA gone rogue. Homeowner targeted in unlawful demolition attempt. Power trip in Cedar Crest Hills. When a community board turns criminal. Even a Denver affiliate picked it up. And when the media got hold of it, others started coming forward. The first was an elderly couple named the Sheffields, whose house sat on the opposite edge of Cedar Crest Hills. They'd lived there since the late 80s, long before Karen's crowd put up their gates and landscaping bylaws. Turns out they'd also been asked, pressured really, to adjust the position of their greenhouse, which had been there since 1991. HOA cited view obstruction for pedestrians. They refused. 3 weeks later, their property was cited for overgrown hedges, expired paint finish, and an unauthorized structure. Sound familiar? Then came the Nguyen family. Same playbook. They had built a small pergola on their patio. A beautiful thing, handmade from redwood. HOA claimed it disrupted the visual rhythm of the backyard fence line. They ignored the letter. Weeks later, the HOA fined them $600, shut off their gate access, and flagged their property as non-compliant in the community app. Turns out, that label drops your home's resale value by 5 to 7% overnight. Then came a woman named Paula Griggs, who went full scorched earth on her HOA experience in a viral Facebook post. Turns out, Karen had tried to move Paula's garage by 3 feet. 3. Claimed it disrupted driveway alignment symmetry. When Paula refused, she says Karen threatened to involve zoning authorities. Sound familiar? The pressure campaign wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. I handed all these names to Nancy, and she began building a collective case file. What we were looking at wasn't just one rogue HOA president. It was a sustained abuse of authority, using legal intimidation, misinformation, and back-channel enforcement to try and reshape the neighborhood into some kind of fascist suburban museum exhibit. And the money, that's where it got dark. We got a hold of the HOA's expense records through a whistleblower, one of the former board members, a guy named Alex Dorsey, who'd resigned 6 months earlier. Said he was tired of being complicit. He gave us login credentials to an internal ledger. What we found, over $48,000 in payments to consultants with no business licenses. Multiple checks written to Denton and Sons Landscaping, the same company that showed up with the backhoe. Except that company didn't exist. An entire aesthetic compliance budget line with no oversight used to pay for surveillance drones, hush contracts, and legal threats. One invoice was literally just labeled Alignment Initiative, House 003. That was my house. Nancy handed the file over to the DA's office. We followed it up with a subpoena request for HOA communications over the last 2 years. Emails, text logs, board meeting minutes, all of it. And that's when the smoking gun showed up. Karen had been communicating directly with members of the so-called architectural committee about me for months. One email, dated 6 weeks before the bulldozer incident, read, "He may be legally exempt, but we can use optics to push him into compliance. If he resists, we escalate pressure via code routes." We escalate pressure. Their words. You ever read something that feels like a car crash in slow motion? That's what it felt like. Every damn moment. Every letter, every fake inspector, every silent contractor dropping out of my life. It was all laid out in those emails like a blueprint for psychological warfare. And the worst part? They weren't just targeting me. Jeff found a document tucked inside an old architectural presentation labeled Community Conformity Forecast. It had over a dozen addresses flagged with red dots and the label Outlier Risk. Next to each one was a brief note. Siding material, mismatch. Offset driveway, unregistered structure, non-HOA compliant origin. These were private homes, some that technically weren't even inside the HOA boundary. They had a plan, a literal playbook for alignment, and they'd already executed parts of it. I printed out that document and stared at it for 10 minutes straight. Then I poured a shot of bourbon, called Nancy, and said, "Let's burn the whole thing down." And she said, "Already drafting the match. They always say it happens slowly, then all at once." That's how Cedar Crest Hills came undone. It started with the subpoenas. Nancy filed a civil racketeering complaint in district court, naming Karen Murray, 2 of her board members, and the Architectural Committee as defendants in a case alleging systematic abuse of authority, fraudulent zoning manipulation, and conspiracy to coerce property changes through illegal means. The complaint ran 51 pages. Attached were hundreds of exhibits, financial records, interview transcripts, screenshots, security footage, false invoices, and the alignment forecast spreadsheet that had made me nauseous just looking at it. When word got out about the case, it spread like fire in dry grass. People who'd been too scared to speak up before started flooding our email inbox with stories. Karen had told one neighbor his porch violated community symmetry and threatened daily fines. Another got cited for scent pollution because their rose bushes were too pungent. But what really nailed the coffin shut was the criminal warrant. The DA, after reviewing the bulldozer incident and the faked inspector credentials, issued formal charges against Karen for criminal trespass with intent to destroy private property, misuse of organizational funds, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of regulatory authority. That last one, a felony. They arrested her in broad daylight. I was there standing beside the Sheffields when the sheriff's deputies pulled up to the HOA office and walked in like they'd done it 100 times. Karen tried to stand tall, still in her signature taupe pantsuit and white heels, but her hands trembled as they cuffed her. She didn't even make a statement, just stared straight ahead like the mask had finally cracked and she didn't know who she was underneath it. Within 24 hours, the board dissolved itself. Emergency HOA meeting, closed session, no minutes recorded. Alex Dorsey told me what happened after the fact. The remaining board members voted to shut down the Cedar Crest Hills Homeowners Association permanently. No more fees, no more committees, no more Karen. The neighborhood didn't know what to do with itself. Half the residents were relieved. The other half wandered around in bathrobes, unsure of how to function without someone telling them their shutters were 2 shades off code. It was like watching a cult come out of hypnosis. But I wasn't done. Nancy filed for damages, property defacement, emotional distress, loss of professional income, legal expenses, home security reinforcements, and reputational harm. We also filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission, citing ethics violations and leadership misconduct. It went further than I ever expected. A state-level investigation opened into Cedar Crest Hills and 3 other HOAs Karen had been previously involved with. Turned out this wasn't her first rodeo, just the one where she finally went off the rails enough to get caught. The final court date came on a brisk Thursday morning. I wore the same rental suit. Didn't need anything fancy. The judge read the findings aloud, calm and direct. The court finds the defendants acted in violation of municipal law, HOA governance boundaries, and constitutional property protections. The court orders full restitution to the plaintiff in the amount of $620,000. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Karen sat there, pale and quiet. The only sound she made was a long, slow exhale when the sentence came down. 12 years. No parole for the first 6. When they took her away, she didn't look back. Maybe she finally understood that controlling a neighborhood isn't the same as owning it. Maybe not. The rest of the board was banned from holding office in any HOA for life. Their names got quietly added to a database no one knew existed until now. Blacklisted from ever playing pretend government again. The Cedar Crest Hills property map was updated, the old boundary lines erased. My land marked exactly as it always should have been, independent. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was under siege. I felt free. There's a kind of silence that follows a storm. Not the absence of noise, but a fullness. The sound of things falling back into place. That's what the land felt like in the weeks after the trial. Not victory, not even relief. Just stillness. Like the mountain had been holding its breath and was finally letting it out. The first thing I did was tear down the old rusted gate signs. They'd been there since the late 90s, back when my dad thought a few no trespassing notices would keep the coyotes, four-legged and otherwise, off the property. But now they felt like artifacts from a war I no longer needed to fight. I replaced them with something better. A hand-carved sign, cedarwood stained with linseed oil, hung just above the mailbox. It read, "Built by my grandfather. Left alone by the rest. Don't even think about touching it." Bit wordy, sure, but it made me smile every time I saw it. The land started breathing again. Kids rode bikes past the entrance without glancing nervously at the house. Neighbors waved like normal people instead of spies in suburbia. Even the mailman stopped getting spooked by the security cameras. And the house. The house stood the same as it always had. Porch creaked in the same place. Chimney let off that same little curl of smoke in the morning. Stone foundation solid as the first day my granddad laid it. But I was different. I took part of the settlement money and rebuilt the old side porch, turned it into an open-air workshop. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy roof, some reclaimed tables, and a bunch of stools. And every Saturday afternoon, I host a small group of architecture students from the local college. No credit, no grades, just conversation. We talk about design, of course, structure, lines, tension, harmony, but we also talk about boundaries, the invisible kind, the kind that HOA boards cross without permission, that bureaucrats forget were never theirs to manage. We talk about how a house isn't just a structure, but a statement, and how freedom doesn't come from fences, but from respect, for space, for history, for the people who came before you. One of the students, a sharp kid named Jordan, asked me once if I regretted not selling when Cedar Crest started developing. I told him no, because selling would have meant giving up a piece of something no one could ever replicate, a home built with bare hands, owned without permission, and defended without apology. Word of the workshop spread. A couple journalists visited. One wrote a piece called "The House That Wouldn't Move." Another ran with "When HOA Meets Its Match. How One Man Held the Line." Dramatic, but not wrong. Even the county commissioner paid a visit. Said my case helped spur a regional review of HOA overreach and reform policies, including restrictions on jurisdiction creep and mandatory training on property law for board members. A year ago, I didn't even know jurisdiction creep was a term. Now it might end up being named after me. Karen, last I heard, she filed an appeal from prison. It was denied. She's serving her sentence in a medium security facility outside Pueblo. Some folks say she's teaching classes in prison administration. Others say she spends her days reorganizing library books alphabetically and by spine color. Me, I don't care. The page turned. The payout from the civil judgment came through in full, $620,000 minus fees. I used part of it to replace my truck, upgrade the security system, and finally install that damn hot tub my wife used to dream about before the world got hard. And every time I sit in that steaming water under the cold Colorado stars, I think about my grandfather, how he'd be proud, not because I fought, but because I didn't back down.